Father Timothy Newcastle Adventures, Replacing Prideful Thoughts. Father Timothy Newcastle was a lively and cheerful priest in a small, close-knit town called Willowbrook. He was known for his booming laugh, twinkling eyes, and knack for making the Bible come alive with his imaginative storytelling. The kids loved him, the adults admired him, and even the grumpy old cat that hung around the church seemed to enjoy his presence. But what made Father Timothy truly special was his honesty. He wasn't afraid to admit that, like everyone else, he had struggles too. And one of those struggles was pride. Conversation with Mrs. Appleby. One bright morning, Father Timothy was tending the small vegetable garden behind the church when Mrs. Appleby stopped by. Mrs. Appleby was the unofficial town historian, and a woman who always had her eye on everything. "Good morning, Father," she called out, holding a basket of fresh muffins. "Good morning, Mrs. Appleby. What brings you here on such a fine day?" Father Timothy greeted her warmly. "I came to bring you these muffins, but I also wanted to thank you for your wonderful sermon on humility last Sunday," she said, placing the basket on the garden table. "It really made me think." Father Timothy wiped the dirt off his hands and sat down. "Humility is a tough one, isn't it? I still catch myself struggling with pride sometimes." Mrs. Appleby gasped. "You, Father, you struggle with pride?" He chuckled. "Of course. Pride is sneaky. It can slip into our hearts before we even notice. But I've learned a few tricks to fight it, and I'd be happy to share one with you." The town festival and a big challenge. That afternoon, Father Timothy was busy helping the townspeople prepare for the annual Willowbrook Festival. The festival was a big deal, with games, music, and a pie-eating contest that everyone looked forward to. This year, Father Timothy had been asked to judge the pie contest. He was thrilled, but as the day went on, something strange began to happen. People kept praising him for all the work he'd done for the festival. "Father, you're amazing. What would we do without you?" one man said. "You're the heart of this town, Father," another woman added. At first, Father Timothy felt warm and happy inside, but soon those kind words started to swirl in his mind. "Maybe I really am the most important person here," he thought. That's when he felt a nudge in his heart. It was as if God was whispering, "Careful, Timothy. Pride is sneaking in." The muddy adventure. Later that day, a group of kids ran up to Father Timothy, their faces red with excitement. "Father, come quick. There's a calf stuck in the mud by the river." Without a second thought, Father Timothy grabbed a rope and followed the kids. Sure enough, there was a little brown calf, stuck up to its knees in a muddy patch near the riverbank. "Let's get you out of there," Father Timothy said, rolling up his sleeves. As he worked to free the calf, he could hear some of the kids whispering behind him. "Wow, Father Timothy can do everything. He's like a superhero." Father Timothy smiled, but then he caught himself. "Uh-oh, Timothy, there's that pride again," he thought. Just as the calf wiggled free, Father Timothy slipped and fell face first into the mud. The kids burst into laughter, and even Father Timothy couldn't help but laugh as he stood up, covered head to toe in muck. "I guess I'm not so perfect after all," he said with a grin. Replacing prideful thoughts. That evening, after a long bath and some quiet time, Father Timothy sat down to pray. He reflected on the day and realized how easily pride had crept into his thoughts. He decided it was time to put into practice what he often preached. "Lord," he prayed, "I'm sorry for letting pride take over today. Help me to remember that my worth comes from you, not from what people say about me." Then he wrote down a few affirmations to help him replace prideful thoughts with humble ones. "I am God's servant, called to love and serve others. My worth comes from Christ, not from achievements or recognition." Father Timothy kept these affirmations in his pocket and read them whenever he felt pride creeping in. Teaching the kids about humility. The next day, Father Timothy gathered the children in the churchyard for a lesson. He had a big poster with the words "God's truth" written at the top. "Who can tell me what pride is?" he asked. "It's when you think you're better than everyone else," one boy said. "Or when you want people to notice how great you are," a girl added. "That's right," Father Timothy said. "But do you know what's even better than being great? Being humble." One of the kids raised her hand. "But how do we stop prideful thoughts, Father?" Father Timothy smiled. "Great question. When prideful thoughts pop into your head, you can fight them with God's truth. For example, if you think, "I'm the best at everything," remind yourself, I'm God's servant, called to love and serve others." He handed each child a card with a humble affirmation written on it. "Keep this with you and read it whenever you need a reminder," he said. A lesson for the whole town. On the last day of the festival, Father Timothy stood up to give a short speech. The townspeople were gathered around, laughing and enjoying the festivities. "I want to thank you all for making this festival such a success," he began. "But I also want to share something I learned this week. Sometimes when people say nice things about me, I let it go to my head. Pride sneaks in, and I forget that everything I do is only possible because of God." The crowd nodded, and a few people smiled knowingly. "So I've started a new habit," Father Timothy continued. "Whenever I feel pride creeping in, I say to myself, I am God's servant, called to love and serve others. It helps me remember what really matters." The festival's humble hero. By the end of the day, everyone agreed that this year's festival was the best one yet. But what made it truly special wasn't the games, the pies, or even the music. It was the way Father Timothy reminded everyone of the importance of humility and relying on God's truth. As Father Timothy walked home that evening, he felt a deep sense of peace. He knew that replacing prideful thoughts wasn't something he could do on his own, but with God's help, he was on the right path. And as he looked up at the stars, he whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for teaching me how to live humbly and serve joyfully. May I always find my worth in you." The takeaway: just like Father Timothy, we all struggle with pride from time to time. But when we catch those prideful thoughts and replace them with God's truth, we grow closer to Him and become better at loving and serving others. So the next time you think, "I'm the best," or "I need people to notice me," remember Father Timothy's lesson. Say to yourself, "I am God's servant, called to love and serve others. My worth comes from Christ, not from achievements or recognition." And always remember, true greatness comes from humility and trusting in God.